Coral bleaching is talked about around the world. Many of us know that it is a threat to our reef ecosystems. However, what you might not understand is that there are so many other factors at play within the reef ecosystem, and bleaching is just one of them. Predation, disease, and damage through natural and unnatural causes are also occurring factors. Some of these impacts are reasonably easy to identify, but others can be difficult to distinguish to the untrained eye. Many impacts are naturally occurring and are seen within any healthy reef ecosystem. On the other hand, some of these are not and can affect this natural balance. This short video aims to help differentiate these impacts and not paint them with the same broad stroke of bleaching. Bleaching is a natural process in which the algae inside the coral's tissues, called zooxanthellae, is expelled due to many different factors, including sudden temperature changes and the increase of rainfall. If unfavorable conditions such as these arise, the corals expel their algae. They do this as a stress response to the toxins being produced by the algae. The expulsion from the coral tissues causes the corals to appear white, as it is the algae that gives them their color. This means that a bleached coral is not a dead coral, but it instead is a stressed coral. A coral in this state can still recover if these unfavorable conditions are removed within 2 to 3 months. Therefore, bleaching is a natural process, as the corals are doing this to protect themselves. However, what isn't natural is the rate of bleaching that we are documenting on our reefs around the world. These increasing rates are most likely due to the effect of human activity on climate change. Human-related impacts need to decrease in order to help reefs around the world maintain their beauty. Not all fully bleached corals look the same. For example, you can have fully bleached, where the coral has expelled all the zooxanthellae from its tissues and so appears an immaculate white color. In other cases, some corals contain proteins in their tissues. So when the zooxanthellae is expelled, the proteins are left behind, and these corals fluoresce due to their natural color being revealed. However, in both cases, the coral's tissues is still alive and capable of recovery as long as the stress factors are removed in time. Partial bleaching is seen when not all the algae has been expelled yet. Instead, you get patches of white as well as decreasing color gradients throughout the coral. This means that the bleaching process has just begun and the coral has an even higher chance of recovery, provided that the stress factors are removed. What can often be confused as partial bleaching is actually new coral growth. This is generally seen in the tips or edges of faster growing, branching, and bushy corals. The reason for this is that the algae inside the coral's tissues cannot reproduce at a fast enough rate to fill in the rapidly growing space. Hence, we see growth tips appearing as white ends on the coral. This is a sign of coral growth, not coral decline, and is actually a welcomed sight among scientists. When many people see dead coral covered in algae, they do not realize that these are ideal habitats for coral recruits. Open space is very limited on a coral reef. When a coral dies, it opens up a whole new habitat for coral recruits that is needed for them to thrive. This small basis of decay and growth is how reefs develop into the creations we see today at so many snorkeling and diving sites around the world. Predation on coral reefs is often incorrectly seen as bleaching, but instead it is a vital part of the ecosystem, and without it the reef cannot survive. This being said, overpredation is detrimental to the ecosystem and is a problem that we are currently facing on coral reefs around the world. Certain species on the Great Barrier Reef are at healthy numbers, such as parrotfish, pufferfish, and butterfly fish. However, others are not. For example, the crown of thorns starfish has reached outbreaking numbers and the Drupella snail is approaching. Parrotfish are an essential part of the reef ecosystem as they keep the macroalgae coverage in check, as well as constantly recycling nutrients. Parrotfish scrape off patches of corals to eat the zooxanthellae inside the coral's tissues. They consume the algae and recycle the rest of the coral as sand, producing approximately 20 to 30% of the sand found on coral reef ecosystems. Bumphead parrotfish leave even more distinctive marks on the coral. They consume a big chunk of coral, removing the entire tips of branching and bushy corals, leaving a white stump rather than a small scraping behind. This could be seen as human damage if not carefully observed. Damage caused by bumpheads is actually helpful for the reef, as it keeps fast-growing corals down and keeps the biodiversity up. Pufferfish scars can be seen as circular patterns. In this case, they are actually after the coral tissue. But as long as populations are at healthy numbers, they are not a threat to the reef and instead play a part in recycling nutrients. The coral will also grow back relatively quickly, so there is no lasting damage. In comparison, butterfly fish leave faint scraping patches on boulder corals that look similar to a coral that has been damaged by the fins of divers and snorkelers. Butterfly fish are also no threat to the survival of corals and are actually a sign of a healthy reef ecosystem. Drupella are a small species of sea snail that eat the tissue of corals. However, in some reefs they are not in sustainable numbers. When found in these large numbers, they can cause severe damage to the reef. The scarring left behind by Drupella can be very difficult to separate from bleaching and disease at first glance unless they are obviously visible on the coral. Crown of thorns are currently the biggest predatory threat to corals on the Great Barrier Reef, as they have been recorded in outbreaking numbers. The scarring left behind is a distinctive circular shape and is very different from bleaching, as no tissue is left behind. If the scarring is recent, it will be a bright white in color, and there will likely be one nearby. In Cairns, the government is trying to tackle the crown of thorns outbreaks by training local residents to identify and safely remove them from reef ecosystems. As this species of sea star is highly venomous, removal of them should be left to the trained professionals. Diseases are a natural part of any ecosystem, and corals, just like any animal, can get sick. When corals are facing stress factors, they can become more susceptible to disease. The general rule in identifying disease, opposed to bleaching, is that there is a clear progression as the infection spreads throughout the coral. These progressions can be seen through a band of disease, with healthy coral on one side and recently killed coral on the other. Physical damage can range from a fin kick of a diver brushing against a coral to an entire reef being affected by a cyclone. The scale of damage caused can vary from negligible to a reef losing a large percentage of its coral cover. As visitors to the reef, we should not be altering the reef in any way. However, the reality is that many people are not careful and in turn accidentally cause harm. When you have hundreds of people jumping into the water every day, this can quickly become an issue. Typically, shallow branching and bushy corals are seeing the most damage as they are closest to the surface and very fragile. Human damage is often easily distinguished from bumphead predation, as they snap branches will be somewhere nearby rather than fully consumed. On the other hand, damage caused by turtles can be hard to distinguish from diver-related damage, as it is very similar in appearance. Human-related damage is unnatural and needs to be avoided. Cyclones are essentially a reset button for the reef. When they occur many years apart, they are beneficial to the reef ecosystem. Cyclonic events tend to wipe out the fragile, fast-growing corals, giving rise to the slower-growing ones, and in turn increasing the biodiversity. It is predicted that we will start to see an increase in the frequency and intensity of cyclones due to climate change. This could be damaging as the reef's necessary recovery time is shortened, and so the overall health of the reef could be at risk. Rubble patches are often created as a result of storm damage. They can be seen as sections where dead coral skeletons have accumulated and algae has cemented everything together. These patches are again ideal habitats for coral recruits, even though they may often look barren and inhospitable from a distance. Coral recruits search for places like this as it offers sturdy substrate for them to start life. When viewed closer, the tiny coral polyps are just beginning their life cycles beside the recruits that have been there for a few months. Bleaching and damage are both serious issues that reefs around the world are facing, and this video is not about downplaying the threat. That said, hopefully now you can see that there are many other factors that can lead to corals appearing white, and not all of them are detrimental to the reef. Many of these factors are essential for the reef to remain stable and healthy, but only in the right proportions. We as humans need to do our part to help minimize our impact and decrease the frequency of the effects of climate change on reefs worldwide. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you want to find out more about the Great Barrier Reef and all of its complexities, don't hesitate to check out our website or come along to one of our evening shows.